I'm just going to start just a minute early because I have a lot of things to talk to you about before we turn the program over to Sandy. So let me get started. I am Mary Jones. I'm the Executive Director. I think most of you know that. At this time, I want to introduce you to our board. I think most of them are here tonight. And I have a reason for that. Toby, I want you to stand up, just raise your hand. Toby, our president. I don't want you to stand up. It's okay. Toby had his 91st birthday last week. Yes. I'm going to call people off in alphabetical order. If you can come up here and stand. Linda Sutton Britton. Nancy King Crawford, Gloria Cadry Fike, Tonya Henry, Barbara Hodap is not here, Suzanne Jones Campbell, Alice Lockhart, Val Martin is not here, but I think most of you know who Val is. He's been around here a long time. Gary Maxwell, Gary he usually is. Oh, okay. Judy Elkins Woods. Okay, the reason that I'm calling about Suzanne and Gloria, come on up. Is there anybody still sitting in the audience at the board member? No. The reason I am asking you for this is that this is election month. And at one time, Stuart Heritage re-elected new directors every year. And I'm asking you to keep the most wonderful bunch of board directors that there is for another year. So can we ask, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, you're ready again for a year. Thank you. I'm sorry that the newsletters did not get out on time. It did not have anything to do with us. We had it there actually 2 weeks early. The man that prints them sent me an apology, said his printing company messed them up and they had to be reprinted. So most of you should have gotten them today. I hope you did. So it's really not fair to Pete that they didn't go out like they should, but there isn't anything we can do about it. It happened. So. Like I was telling you earlier, the wreaths on the back table were made by Nancy Crawford's daughter, Lynn, and they are absolutely gorgeous. They are to be auctioned off. They are $5 each or 3 for $10. Let me say that wrong. And they will be auctioned off on December the 14th at our holiday open house at the museum, and I hope all of you will attend that. We will have a tree that's being made by Barbara Hodap with help from Susan and John. It will be also auctioned off, and it will be at the museum the day after Thanksgiving. Most of you know that we pay $250 a month to use the building. And tonight we'll be selling tickets for $1 on a $25 ornament, which will be drawn before the program's over tonight. I've had requests to go back to the 50-50, and I will be glad to do that. I'm losing my voice. I'm sorry, I'm so scratchy. If you all want the 50-50 back, we'll be glad to do that because that helps us pay the bill. So we will not have a meeting here in January. Stuart Main Street is taking it over, and it's going to be called Flagler Center again, correct, Rick?
Correct.
Okay. And that's too soon. It's December 31st. That's too soon for us to impose on them to have all the speaker system and everything ready. So in January, we are going to have a night open house at the museum. I believe it's January the 14th. We'll have Alice, Gloria, and Judy doing tours. And if you've never been on one of those tours, you've never been on a tour, because they do good ones. So come on down and visit us. The rest of us will stand there and talk to you, but they'll do tours. I wrote myself notes tonight. If I could give it a card. It will be open from 6 to 8:30. Our February program will be back here in this room with Faye James and her family on Black History. Okay, I think that's everything for tonight. I'm ready to turn the program over to Sandy Turbo, who will introduce to us a close person and member of Stuart Heritage Meier. Thank you, Sandy.
Well, we have a nice crowd here. I was so worried with the newsletter not going out. Welcome to this program. I have known Chris Meier before I knew Pete Meier, and everybody has such an interesting story, and I thought, my goodness, I had this little clipping on Chris, and when I read that she lived in Nigeria, and she had all this interesting background, and then every time I go to my son's house, I pass this house that has a sign on it, Meier, on the river in one of those shores, and then I got to meet Pete, and he told me a little of this story about, and I'm going to insist he tell it just a little before we get started on this program, about where he was born, and when he went to work for Grumman, and it was practically a neighbor, wasn't it? Grumman. So, Chris, will you stand up? He has such a pretty wife. And she talks very pretty too. Pete Meier.
And she speaks English, not American. Okay, I was born on Long Island in a little town called Glen Head on the North Shore near Glen Cove. I went to Clarkson University in upstate New York and got a mechanical engineering degree, graduated in '64, and I went to work for Grumman Aerospace. I knew I was going there because I had worked for them as a summer student, so that was very convenient to know where you were going a year before you graduated. I worked on a couple of Vietnam aircraft that Grumman was using, and they put me onto the Lunar Module. I worked on the descent propulsion side of the Lunar Module. I went to the Cape with the program in 1966. Did all the pre-flights before the lunar landing in July 20th of this year, and also worked with the Apollo 13 rescue. And after that, there was a pause in the program while they figured out what went wrong with the North American problem on the service module. Grumman's work was perfect. We had a few minor problems, but everything was very successful. So they wanted to ship me back to Long Island. I love Florida, boating and fishing. So I left Grumman and found a job at Outboard Marine Corporation Test and Developmental Center. And for a mechanical engineer who likes to boat and fish, I just died and went to heaven. It was like working at a mechanical engineering toy shop. So people say, how can you go from rocket engines to boats? And I simply say, thrust is thrust. So just apply the principles to it. But I put this program together. I started with it about, beginning of this year, knowing that the 50th anniversary was coming up. I've done it about at least 10 times in the community, 3 times at the library, once at the museum. I showed the the Pratt & Whitney Engineer Retiree Club. I showed the Sikorsky helicopter pilots. And it's been fun. I even showed my grandson's class in the school. Let's get started. And fasten your seatbelts for launch here. I can walk around with this, so I don't have to, I don't want to stand in the way of the cameraman here. I think I have to go to this side to make this work. Okay, let's talk a little bit first about the launch platform when we go into orbit. A little bit about Earth dynamics. The Earth is 8,000 miles in diameter, pretty close to that number. The circumference around the equator is 25,000 miles. We all know that it rotates once a day. That's how we have our sunrise and sunset. And it rotates to the east. Okay, a man standing at the equator is actually traveling 1,000 miles per hour to the east relative to the space above him. You take the circumference of the Earth, 25,000 miles. It goes once around in 24 hours. So he's moving at over 1,000 miles an hour. The man has no sensation of this speed since he's pinned to the Earth by its gravitational force, and the atmosphere rotates with him most of the time. We know in Hurricane Dorian that wasn't quite true. The sun isn't moving during a sunrise or a sunset. The Earth is revolving. So if somebody says to you, "Did you see that gorgeous sunset tonight?" You're supposed to say, "No, it was an Earth rotation." Now this is an illusion that baffled the astronomers back 300 or 400 years ago, Galileo and Copernicus. And they finally figured out that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. A man standing at the North Pole would turn one revolution in 24 hours. I just want to put a little side note in here that I forgot to mention in the introduction. I suggested to Chris at the beginning of the year, do you think the Heritage Club would like this? And she said, probably not. They're more interested in the history of Warren County and the history of Stuart. And after Sandra Thurlow contacted me, I said, look, this is kind of part of your heritage because everything taking off of the tape flew over the coast here looking up into orbit. So you saw a lot of launches. So the man standing at the North Pole would make one revolution in his feet in 24 hours. He might freeze to death, but that's all he would do is turn around slowly. He wouldn't know. At a smaller latitude ring north of the equator at Kennedy Space Center, and you might as well say Stuart, Florida, the speed of a man is about 850 miles an hour to the east. You're doing that right now. You don't sense it. But this also includes the launch platforms at Kennedy Space Center. All payloads and satellites need to reach 17,500 miles an hour to obtain a circular orbit around the Earth at a low altitude of about 100 to 200 miles. At that altitude, one orbit is about 90 minutes. Since the launch pads at Kennedy Space Center are traveling 850 miles an hour to the east due to the rotation of the Earth, this is a little bit of a bonus. You're already moving in that direction. So now payloads only have to accelerate to 16,650 miles an hour to obtain a 17,500 mile an hour orbit. Now, could we have built the Space Center in Tampa and launched to the west? Sure. But if you launch to the west, those launch platforms are going to the east. You have to overcome the 850 to the east and add that on to 17,500, so you have to build a bigger booster, which is unnecessary. I think I skipped one there. Now, if you go slower than 17,500 miles an hour, you'll re-enter the atmosphere and burn up if you don't have an ablative shield on your spacecraft. If you go faster than 17,500 miles an hour, you'll go into an elliptical orbit with an apogee, which is the high altitude of the oval orbit, and a perigee, which is the low point. Faster than 25,000 miles an hour, that is required to escape the Earth's gravitational field. And once you do that, you'll go into an orbit around the sun, which is called a heliocentric orbit. This had to be accomplished going to the moon. Just a little word on communication satellites. Communication and TV satellites, they orbit about 22,000 mile altitude. Here, the Earth's gravitational field is about 1/3 of that at sea level. Now, because the gravitational field is less, the orbital speed, instead of being 17,500, is about 6,800 miles an hour. Now, why is this important? At 22,000 miles and the speed of 6,800 miles per hour, it takes 24 hours for that communication satellite to orbit the Earth. Well, the Earth also takes 24 hours to make one revolution. Therefore, it appears that the satellite is hanging over your head. That satellite is moving at 6,800 miles an hour. You're moving in Stuart at 850. So keep that in mind. Everything is moving. There's gravitational fields everywhere out there. Once in orbit, a satellite doesn't care if the Earth is revolving or not. The fact that the Earth revolves is why communication and TV satellites work. Now, the moon has a diameter of about 2,100 miles. The gravitational force on the moon is about 1/6 of the Earth's gravitational force. Now, in order to orbit the moon, that's about 60 miles for the Command Service Module and Lunar Module orbit. That orbital speed is about 3,600 miles an hour. I know there's a lot of numbers here, but I'm an engineer, so bear with me. This is an important part of getting there. Remember, Earth, you're orbiting at 17,500. The moon has 1/6 of the gravity. You only need to do 3,600 miles an hour. I just jumped the slide there. Oops, here we go. John F. Kennedy, when he became president, he we were losing the space race to the Russians. One of our senior research vice presidents told me that the reason we were losing the space race was because of Eisenhower. And I said, what did he have to do with it? Well, after World War II, when he became president, he just did not want rocketry involved in this program, and it was an important part. Kennedy saw that need, and he put forth the challenge that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before the decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. That speech was made at Rice University campus. The Russians had launched the first satellite Sputnik in '57 and had made some successful man-over flights. The U.S. was far behind the Russians, and the space race would utilize 3 programs to accomplish the lunar landing. These included Mercury, Gemini, and finally Apollo. I remember I was a sophomore or junior in high school when I saw the U.S. first attempt to launch a satellite with the Vanguard. I don't know if you remember that, but the Vanguard took off, went up about 6 feet, and crumbled back to Earth in a huge explosion. And I thought, come on, USA, you can do better than that. So, lo and behold, I would find myself working on the program. I was fortunate. The Mercury program consisted of a space capsule with 1 astronaut. The goals were to orbit a manned spacecraft around the Earth, investigate the man's ability to function in space, and to recover both man and spacecraft safely. It consisted of 6 manned flights, May 61 through May 63. The first 2 flights were on a Redstone rocket, which was not powerful enough to get into orbit. Alan Shepard was the first American into space. May of '61, the Redstone payload could only lift 4,000 pounds. The next 4 Mercury capsules were launched aboard the Atlas rocket. The Atlas payload was 3,000 pounds, and the rocket obtained the orbital speed of 17,500 miles an hour. John Glenn was the first astronaut to receive orbit on February 20th, 1963. Now, Gemini consisted of a 2-man capsule. The goals were to demonstrate rendezvous and docking. That was very important for the Lunar Module project. To do extra vehicular activities, to do a targeted reentry and an Earth landing, which was never done, and accomplish long duration flights. I think some of those flights lasted almost 2 weeks. There was 10 manned flights between March of '65 and November of '66. The Titan 1 and 2, or 2 and 3, I should say, were used to launch the Gemini. The payload capacity of the Titan 2 was 8,000 pounds. The Titan 2 was a missile that was used in our missile silos for defense against the Russians during the Cold War. Several spacewalks were done during the Gemini project. And then along came Apollo, which consisted of a 3-stage rocket to launch the Lunar Module and the Command and Service Module. The Lunar Module was built by Grumman Aerospace. The Command Service Module was built by North American Rockwell, California. The Apollo Saturn V, the liftoff thrust of the Apollo Saturn V was 7.5 million pounds. The total liftoff weight was 6.5 million pounds. The total propellant on all the stages, including the command service module, the lunar module, and all three stages, was 5.6 million pounds of propellant. 86% of that whole missile was propellant. They're just lying bombs. It could lift 240,000 pounds of payload into orbit. Here's one of the 5 F1 engines. It's the biggest liquid propellant engine made to date. It would burn 671 gallons of fuel and oxygen each second. And there was 5 of them going at the same time. And by comparison, the space shuttle peak lift off thrust was 6.7 million pounds. The Saturn V was 7.5 million. And it had 2 solid boosters, 2.8 million pounds each, and 3 liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen shuttle engines, each with 375,000 pounds of thrust. There was 135 missions flown by the shuttle. And we did have 2 accidents with the shuttle. I actually was working out one Marine when I saw one go up and explode off the Cape when I went up that very cold morning, and one of the O-rings on the side of the booster burned through, and it happened to aim at the liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen tank instead of aiming out. If it aimed out, I probably would have known. But we lost that mission, then we lost another mission when a chunk of ice broke the ablative shield off the wing. The shuttle weight with cargo was 223,000 pounds. The payload was 65,000 pounds. The shuttle actually wound up building the International Space Station, among other things. Once the booster was jettisoned, which occurred about 2.5 minutes into flight, the shuttle engines would propel the craft from 3,000 to 17,500 miles an hour in 6 minutes. The Saturn V, the first stage of the Saturn V, burned for about a minute and 2.5 minutes. And in that 2.5 minutes, it lost 4 million pounds of weight with expelling propellant. It propelled the vehicle to 6,160 miles an hour at an altitude, I think it was 42 miles. Second stage had 5, I should say, liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen engines. Each engine had 232,000 pounds of thrust. That second stage weighed 1 million pounds, and 92% was propellant. The burn was 6 minutes. And nearly got it into orbit. Then the third stage had 1 liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen engine, and it could be shut down and restarted. The third stage was used to insert the spacecraft into a trans-lunar trajectory. Here's the Apollo 11 payload shown with the command service module and the lunar module, and you can see the 4 legs sticking out from below the ring section of the assembly. This clicker's a little bit slow, so. Okay, the Saturn V was 363 feet tall. This is the actual rollout photo of the Apollo 11. Coming out of the vehicle assembly building on May 20th, 1969. That was on what we call a crawler. Here's an example of the crawler, show you how huge that was. Each one of those technicians would work atop the white room through which the astronauts would enter the spacecraft, while other technicians put on from the launch tower at the Kennedy Space Center. This was July 11, 1969. There were several Apollo flights to test vehicles. Apollo 1, if you may remember, there was a ground test at the Cape where there was a fire in the capsule and we lost the 3 astronauts. I happened to be, being a kind of a space buff, I was off, but I went over to the North American Rockwell Control Center while they were doing the test, and they had a VIP assembly room in the back that had about, about a dozen seats. And I watched the whole process for about a half hour, and I left. And I left about 15 minutes later. I was on my way home. By the time I came home, everybody was shocked that there had been a fire. We lost the 3 astronauts. And it was quite a tragedy. But there was Apollo 8 was urged on to do a Christmas flight. And that was done by Frank Grumman, who was one of the astronauts on that. And that orbited the moon in '68. This is one of the first shots taken of what they call an Earthrise. And it's said to be one of the most popular photos distributed worldwide. Apollo 9 tested the Lunar Module in Earth orbit for, I don't think it was 8 or 9 days. Then Apollo 10 flew to the moon, and the LEM descended to within 10 miles of the moon, and then dropped the descent stage, the ascent stage, flew back up and joined the command service module just to prove that these guys could rendezvous. And then Apollo 11 was the first landing. Eight and a half years after President Kennedy's challenge, men landed on the moon, July 20th, 1969. Now the Lunar Module computer, this is interesting, had 2K of RAM, 38K of ROM, read-only memory. Computer on the Lunar Module was 40K. By comparison, my cell phone has 64 gigabytes. And if you do the math, my cell phone is 1.6 million times more powerful than the Lunar Module computer, to show you how technology has advanced with a microprocessor. The Lunar Module was built by Grumman in Bethpage, Long Island. This is the Grumman plant. That's plant 25 where the Lunar Module engineering was done. That's the plant I worked in before I got shipped to the Cape. And in front is the Grumman F-14. I think Grumman built somewhere around 850 F-14s for the Navy. It was the prime fighter for, I don't know, 15 or 20 years. During the next 3 years, there'd be 5 additional landings between December of '72 and the Lunar Module LM-12 on Apollo 17. The last landing was December '72 with LM-12 on Apollo 17. I'll go through this kind of briefly. There was 15 Lunar Modules built. If you go down to LM-3, that was on Apollo 9. That was Earth orbit test. LM-4 was Apollo 10. That went into a lunar orbit and didn't land. And then LM-5 at the top was Eagle. That's when Neil Armstrong said, "Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed." Each of the lunar modules was named. I don't know how, I think the astronauts came up with the names. Apollo 12 was a successful landing where it landed near the surveyor. Apollo 13 was the failure. You probably saw the movie on that. I'll talk about that in a minute. Apollo 14 was successful. And then Apollo 15, 16, and 17 all had a rover on it, which was added to the descent stage. The rover was a vehicle they could ride around the moon surface on. 12 men walked on the moon in 6 missions. 8 have passed away already. The 4 in red are still alive. Then there's 2 in green, Fred Hayes and Jim Lovell. They're still alive, and they were on Apollo 13. Jim Lovell is one of the only astronauts that went to the moon twice and never landed. He was on the Christmas flight, Apollo 8, and he was on the failed flight on Apollo 13. Now, shortly after orbit insertion, the 3rd stage was fired to reach a speed of 25,000 miles an hour to escape the Earth's gravitational field. The command service module undocked from the 3rd stage and rotated 180 degrees and redocked with the lunar module. The 3rd stage, after release of the lunar module and command service module, is shown here. This stage has escaped the gravitational force of the Earth and is now orbiting the Sun. There's 7 of those 3rd stages now in orbit around the Sun. The moon orbits the Earth at 240,000 miles. I'm going to walk you through this in a minute, but 2 days after translunar injection at 200,000 miles from Earth and 40,000 miles from the moon, the Earth's gravity has slowed the spacecraft down to 2,500 miles an hour from 25,000 miles an hour. Here the effects, the gravitational effects of the moon and the Earth are equal. Let me walk you through this. I have an Earth over here. I have a moon I found in the grandkids' toy box. It's a basketball, but it's the right diameter, actually. And I have a spacecraft over here on a stick, which is an Easter egg that I also found in the kids' toy box. So what happens is, once we launch and go into Earth orbit at 17,500 miles an hour, and we decide to go for the moon, we fire the 3rd stage here and accelerate up to 25,000 miles an hour right about here. Then for 2 days, you're on a glide path. The Earth is pulling you back, the gravitational field of the Earth. So as you travel, you're slowing down, slowing down. You get to this point about 200,000 miles from Earth and about 40,000 miles from the moon. You slow from 25,000 miles an hour to 2,500 miles an hour. At this point, the gravitational pull of the moon and the Earth are equal. Now the moon starts pulling you in, and it starts accelerating you in. By the time you hit the lunar surface, you're about 5,300 miles an hour. If you don't slow down, you'll arc around the moon's gravity and go into solar orbit. It's a very critical maneuver that you have to slow down to 3,600, go into a lunar orbit, go down to your mission, come back up, and then fire the command service module and head back home for a three-day return. I just kind of touched on this already. This is a graphic of what I just did in case I don't have my moon and earth model with me. But it just shows the transition to and from the moon. This is the lunar module just prior to descent to the moon. The descent engine had an adjustable thrust, 10% increments up to 60%. And then the full throttle. You had to have it adjustable so you could hover during landing. Again, I want to emphasize the amount of propellant required to do these missions. The descent stage total weight was almost 23,000 pounds, 18,000 pounds was propellant. It all had to be designed into the payload. And then the ascent stage, half the way to the ascent stage was propellant. 70% of the lunar module was propellant. You had to take it with you, there's no fuel stations up there. Just a little bit on fuels, I don't want to elaborate on this, but the fuels used on these missions are called hyperbolic fuels and oxidizers. They're actually very toxic and they lag on contact, which is the beauty. There's no ignition system required. Just pour them together and away you go. I don't want to elaborate on this too much, but descent stage had 2 oxidizer and 2 fuel tanks. So the ascent stage. On the very bottom, you see in red the SHE tank. That's one of the areas I work on. That was supercritical helium. Helium was used as a pressurizing agent to push the fuel and oxidizer down to the engine. The tanks are bladder tanks, so you pressurize the back of the bladder and push everything down into the engine. The lunar module was overweight. We originally had 2 gaseous helium tanks on the descent stage. We suggested to NASA if we switched to 1 liquid helium tank under pressure, we could save 300 pounds of weight. And NASA was willing in $1960 to spend $10,000 per pound of weight savings. After lifting off from the moon, this is a shot of the Eagle approaching the command service module. Keep in mind one thing, once you leave the moon, you got to launch up to 60 miles and catch up to the command service module, which is now moving at 3,600 miles an hour. A little bit about the Apollo 13 disaster. On the way to the moon, the quarter pound, the oxygen tank on the command service module exploded and blew the quarter pound off, rendering the command service module useless. So, on the way to the moon, what did they do? They used the lunar module to slow the spacecraft down as it approached the moon. The then descent engine was fired to slow the spacecraft down to 3,600 miles an hour. As it approached the moon, we did half an orbit. I call it a gravitational slingshot. We fired the engine again here to go back to the Earth. Remembering that the Earth is orbiting the Sun, so we had to aim 3 days over here. There was only 2 slight mid-course corrections needed. So it was quite a rescue. I'm thinking if the door was open back there, it might be better. The Lunar Module is very hot and limited breathing oxygen. And it was barely significant to bring the men back alive. It was 3 men using the oxygen in the Lunar Module where it was designed for 2. One of the band-aids we did, the square canister you see there is lithium hydroxide, and that takes the CO2 out of the air that is expelled from breathing. So we managed to take one of the spacesuit fans, a tube sock, and some duct tape, and force the carbon dioxide air, which loaded through the lithium hydroxide canister, and that kept the men from suffocating, actually. Again, this is another visual of what I just described. One thing I want to point out is in the center of the screen, you see sheet tank vents, the supercritical helium tank vents. That was supposed to vent on the moon. We had made a thrust neutralizer T about a foot long. It was an inch or inch and a quarter titanium pipe. And the residual helium, once it built up pressure and vented, it would just blow left and right and harmlessly vent into space. Well, coming back on the mission, we told the astronauts, you're going to hear a bang. It's a burst disc breaking. Don't worry, the tank is just venting down. We had made this T so short that instead of being venting the diametrically opposed, it vented out this way, which is still harmless. It caused the spacecraft to roll slightly, and the astronauts said, hey, we're rolling slightly, well, we brought it back. But in the Apollo 13 movie, Hollywood had to get in there. The movie was quite good, actually, but this one thing is, when that burst disc blew, they made it look like the cabinets, doors were flying open, and the dishes and covers were coming out, dishes and plates were coming out. It was Hollywood handing it off. That was the only thing I felt was, Hollywood in action. Here's a shot of the service line over the moon. It's a good thing this happened on the way to the moon. If this had happened while they were on the moon, and the command service module was orbiting, the man in the command service module would have perished, and the men on the moon would have no place to go to get home. So it was kind of a blessing where the accident happened. The Lunar rover was added to missions 15, 16, and 17, weighed 462 pounds and could carry over 1,000 pounds. Here's a shot of the Lunar rover, which collapsed and was mounted to the side of the descent stage. Rover from 16 is shown. The longest trip on the rover was 22 miles during Apollo 17, the last time the man was on the moon. And on Apollo 17, you may not remember, but Harrison Schmitt, one of the astronauts who was a PhD geologist, he went to the moon, and he was able to bring back some significant geological samples. This is a 2010 shot of the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter camera, actually taking a picture of the Apollo 11 Lunar Module. If you look closely, you can actually see footsteps in that picture. Here's a shot of Apollo 12. This is the one that landed near the Surveyor, which landed about 3 years before, and they went over and took samples off the Surveyor to see what the exposure of 3 years in space did to the metal pieces. Apollo 12, left an American flag on the moon. On Apollo 11, I think when they took off, it blew the flag over. Now here's a shot from the Museum of the Cape. If you haven't been there, it's a worthwhile trip to take. You can do it in a day. They decided about 20 years ago to take the Saturn V that was out of the field, and they built this building. It's about 600 feet long, about 100 feet high, 100 feet wide. And they laid the whole rocket down horizontally so you could walk all around. A lot of side rooms you could go into and see things. We had our 50th reunion. We had 530 people to a formal dinner underneath that Saturn V booster. It was absolutely fabulous. Here's a view of the front showing the command service module. And in the museum now there is one of the shuttles. The shuttle was retired in 2011. This kind of bummed me out because NASA was supposed to have on the books a replacement for the shuttle. And they canceled that replacement for the time being in, I think, 2007. But they still had the retirement date for the shuttle in 2011. The U.S. now pays the Russians $75 million per seat to fly our men to the International Space Station. Two of our guys go up, it's $150 million. To run the shuttle with manpower at Houston and Cape is about $300 million. So I don't think they should have done this. I think they should have kept some prominence in space until we had boosters developed. Fred Hayes on Apollo 13 became a vice president of Grumman. He once told me, he said, NASA should not be in the transportation business. They should be in the exploration business. Now you're seeing some of the private companies like SpaceX and Boeing getting into the business of transportation. Whoops. Okay. Just a brief here that they're planning a manned mission to Mars. Northrop Grumman is in the process of developing concepts. Mars gravity is about 38%, 2/5 of that of Earth. Has a slight CO2 atmosphere. One of the possible benefits of getting there is Mars has a polar cap, and perhaps they could use the ice for hydrogen and oxygen, and for breathing equipment, and for propellant. Just a few comments before we end here on some of the programs that have gone on since the Lunar Module. You all know about Hubble. It's just a marvelous telescope that has made tremendous discoveries in the universe. Hubble is getting old and it will not be serviced again. And it will be replaced by the James Webb Telescope, which should be launched hopefully soon. There's been a couple of delays. This clicker is not cooperating here. Northrop Grumman is under contract with the Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland for design and development of the Webb telescope. It will be 100 times more powerful than the Hubble. Here's an example of the mirror size on Hubble. Hubble mirrors are almost about 7 feet in diameter, but there's 18 hexagonal gold-plated mirrors on the James Webb, which have to fold up to launch and have to come out into a perfect conical mirror shape to be effective. So there's some real engineering has to be done to get that to work right. Northrop Grumman merged with Grumman in '94 with a buyout. Grumman to share at the time. A few amazing photos and programs that have gone on since the moon landing. You mentioned the Hubble, which took many deep space photos of the universe. International Space Station was assembled using the shuttle. Now you can see the International Space Station fly over with a naked eye. How many have seen it fly over? Okay, it's very easy to see. On your computer, just dial in ISS, like Google. You'll come up with a website, seeing the space station near me. Dial in Stuart, Florida, and up will come a whole list. I have it on here in a minute. Here's the list for November. And there's a lot of good sightings here. The first top part of that is fall in the morning, and later in the month is in the evening. Of course, the evenings, unless you're early bird, the evenings are better to look at. But in some cases, if you look at Friday the 15th, you'll notice there's two sightings there. And if you look down at Sunday the 17th, there's two sightings there. What's happening is the shuttle's coming over perhaps in the east, and then 90 minutes later, you're going to see it as you rotate 850 miles an hour to the east, you'll see it come over in the west. I've rarely seen a double sightings like that. But if you want to get up tomorrow morning, Wednesday the 3rd at 6 a.m., it looks like it's going to be a clear night. That should be a spectacular passing. It's coming almost directly overhead. It'll appear over the northwest and disappear on the southeast, so make note of that. Tomorrow morning at 6, if you get up early, go on outside. And then down on the 18th in the evening, the 18th and the 19th, there's two good sightings in the evening there, which are a little bit easier to see. We did several missions to Mars. The Mars rovers did amazing things. They were supposed to last 3 months. I think one lasted over 10 years. They were solar powered. Just a couple more comments. Some of my favorite programs were Galileo, launched from the shuttle in 1989. It took 6 years to get to Jupiter. Orbited Jupiter for 8 years with many discoveries. Found many of the 60 moons. And did flybys of the 4 major moons. These were amazing. And the 4 moons can be easily seen from Earth with a simple telescope. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory out in California kind of runs these programs for NASA. Then there was Cassini, launched in '97. Took 7 years to get to Saturn. It orbited Saturn for 13 years, discovered many of the 53 moons. The gravitational field of Saturn is much stronger than Earth, and Cassini had an orbit at 76,000 miles an hour staying in orbit. This is one of my favorite shots from Cassini. It actually shows the rings of Saturn, the edge of Saturn, and in the far distance, that little dot is Earth. You wonder how aliens could ever find us. It looks like a tiny little lip. And my all-time favorite is Kepler. Kepler has been in orbit for several years, and it aimed at a very tiny area of the Milky Way and surveyed over 140,000 stars. And what it monitored was when a planet around the star passed in front of the star, like you see on the upper left, there was a slight dimming of the star, and the camera was sensitive enough. It was sensitive enough by comparison to pick up a fly flying in front of a headlight. It's beyond my pay grade to figure out how they do these things. And the universe is really incomprehensible. Our Milky Way galaxy has over 200 billion stars. We can only see about 6,000 of them. The nearest star is 4 light years away. Speed of light travels at 186,000 miles a second. So in 1 year, it would travel 6 trillion miles. So the nearest star is 25 trillion miles from our sun. Plus, the universe was thought to have contained 200 billion galaxies. Recent deep space photos indicate that there now be 1 trillion galaxies. Is there life out there? I say it has to be everywhere. And some life maybe a billion years ahead of us. And that's the end. Now there's going to be a quiz. Now before I go, I need to tell you one story. A couple of years ago, I was leading Stuart, riding west to Indian. I was moving along pretty good, about 75 miles an hour. And lo and behold, I look at my rear view mirror, and there's a blue light flashing. Well, the officer pulls me over, license and registration. He said, "Mr. Meier, the speed limit here is 55. I want you doing at least 75. I'm going to have to give you a ticket." So I begrudgingly took it, and I took it home, and I said, "I'm going to fight this thing." So I went to court. I told the judge, I said, "Look, it may have appeared that I was doing 75 miles an hour to the west, but due to the rotation of the Earth to the east at 850, I was actually going backwards at 775 miles an hour. So the ticket is incorrectly written." So the judge scratched his head, and he says, "Oh, you got a point." He slammed the hammer, and he said, "Case dismissed." Much to the displeasure of the arresting officer. Now, a couple of months later, I was in Indian town, heading back to Stuart. And I was doing about 75 miles an hour. And a blue light appeared behind me. And I don't know what that is. It was the same arresting officer. He said, "Oh, it's you, Mr. Meier." He said, "You know down here that the speed limit is 55, and I thought you were going 75. But due to the rotation of the Earth to the east, I'm writing a ticket up for 925 miles an hour." So it took me 20,000 hours of community service and a $100,000 fine with all the markups. That's all. Thanks.